is Kaya Roman, host of the Psyched podcast, brought to you by the Women in Psychedelics Network. Today, I am so psyched to have Carolyn Adams, known to the world as Mountain Girl Garcia, or affectionately MG. And today, I'm so honored to have her join us. The world knows her as the former wife of Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead, Merry Prankster, bringer of LSD to many, many during the acid tests of the 60s. But there's so much more to MG's story to hear. And I'm just really thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you, MG. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Kaya. It's interesting to meet somebody who's a credentialed uh, psychonaut, and it's always nice to meet people with credentials. And I was just wanted to ask you, how much did you learn in college about psychedelics?
Well, you're going to start by asking me a question. I
Yeah.
love it. You know, I was really fortunate to go to New College in Florida, which Rick Doblin was a regular feature on our campus talking about psychedelics. This was back in the 90s, and MAPS was less than 10 years old. And he was just hanging out, talking to us students about it. It was interesting, but
Mhm.
not something I was particularly going to explore myself. Although some students and I did rent his amazing house in Sarasota. So I was aware of it, but I didn't start having my own psychedelic experiences until about 2017. So, you know, I'm a new psychonaut, I'd say, compared to you. And how about you? When did your psychedelic exploration start?
Well, it really started when Timothy Leary moved to Millbrook in because I grew up nearby, very nearby. And of course, he was already infamous, and all of this made the papers. And I read about him, and I picked up a couple of books at the library as a teenager. And I think I was 17. I had just gotten my driver's license, so I decided I'd drive over there and see what they were up to.
Just
So
drive on over.
yeah, and I went over and I knocked on the door of the house, and they let me in for some reason or other. Instead of just telling me to go away, they said, "Oh, come on in." And then Dr. Leary himself came downstairs and said, "Oh, you have a car. Would you mind driving me into town? I have an errand I have to run." And I'm going like, "Okay, I'm 17. I've got my learner's permit
Right.
and I've got my mom's car, and she doesn't know where I am." So I said, "Okay." And so he got in the back of my car and he brought along a blanket and he covered himself up with the blanket. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is interesting. And managed to drive him into the downtown Poughkeepsie where his bank was and parked right out in front. And he dashed in for about 10 minutes and then dashed back out again and then said, "Okay, take me back." And on
Wow.
the way back, we actually had a bit of a conversation. And I asked him a little bit about psychedelics. And you could tell he was very reluctant at that time to promote or even really discuss psychedelics with a 17-year-old. He'd already been, notified by probably several law enforcement agencies not to do this. But anyway, I gave him the ride. And we became friends right away. And I also met some of the other folks that were staying there at the house in Millbrook. And so this was really, my jumping out of my role just as a high school student. Um, I was already interested in LSD. I had read the Life magazine articles about Maria Savina and the the discovery of LSD, and I had seen a picture of Dr. Hoffman, so I was already interested. I was really smart person in high school. I had all the answers. I was well trained by my very intellectual parents and aced every test. It was a little embarrassing, but I had a high opinion of my ability to manage myself in odd situations. So I didn't have any LSD till quite a bit later. But when I came out to California to get away from home and I followed my brother out there who was doing graduate work at Stanford. So I wound up applying for a job at Stanford and got a job in the mass spectrometer lab. And that was analyzing drugs from all around the world. So I kind of landed in the most unusual spot. And
I read a really interesting bit of information about
great.
you, MG,
Yeah,
that while
yeah.
you were working in that Stanford lab,
Mhm.
you actually tried some ibogaine,
I did. That was my introductory psychedelic because
which
I
is
because
so crazy because that's
Mhm.
usually known as like the, most major psychedelic, the one that people maybe save for last or never try, and you
I can see
started with
why.
it.
I would
Tell
not
us
take
about that
I
experience.
don't think I'd take it again. Well, this little sample comes in a little wee bottle and you're supposed to insert it into the mass spectrometer with tiny little this is and it's all very, very fussy. And I opened the thing up and I looked at it and I said, well, I have a chance to take a psychedelic right now. And I yielded to that temptation and took just a little dab. I mean, it
Uh-huh.
was just a little dab. And within 10 minutes, I was not myself. So wound up having because I'm way down in the basement and there's nobody around. It's the middle of the night.
Oh.
And it's an odd psychedelic, especially in the raw form that I
Mhm.
had it in. It just came in for analysis from these guys in Africa, and it flung me to the ground. Frankly, at a point, I was sort of crawling around on the ground because the floor was concrete. It was nice and cool, and the spectrometer by this time is flashing and blinking and is angry at me and scared me and I was not in a kind environment. I was in the basement of the chemistry lab. So
Wow.
uh, you know, it wasn't a great way to come on to psychedelics, but I managed myself well. I think I gave myself an A for self-management and was able to actually make it back to my apartment, which was about 2 miles away, on my bicycle
Wow.
and it was not easy, but I did it and kind of collapsed. And it took. I didn't feel like the ibogaine was, speaking from the past, my past with other psychedelics. I can say ibogaine was not particularly interesting as a in that form, the raw form. It
Mhm.
may be much better if it was processed and reduced, and get the stems out of it.
Yeah.
but but in the raw form, it was quite a hefty hit. And I didn't take very much at all, like just a tiny little bit on the end of the spatula, the little metal spatula, tiny amount. And it was very powerful. And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but in that form. But,
Right.
but of course,
You wouldn't
I was
recommend doing it in a basement alone,
right.
just
Well, I was
off the cuff.
completely uninformed. I was just stepping out off the cliff, right?
Right.
So I was kind of like giving myself a little talking to. I made it back to my apartment and was able to make things right with myself. So I was all right. But my boss at Stanford was very upset with me for bailing out on that particular test. So I lost my job shortly thereafter. But shortly after that, I ran into the Kesey group in Palo Alto, and then I ran into the Proto Dead who were playing bluegrass music at this cute little bar called the Tangent in downtown Palo Alto, where all the college kids went. I was too young to go in, so I had to just stand out in the street and listen to them play. But this was how my hookup with being becoming an adult. This was when I did it. So I had to learn how to act independently with this knowledge about what psychedelics are, because it was very psychedelic, but because I had no experience, I didn't have much control.
Hmm.
And so now I always advise the youth of today to go with an experienced partner. Don't
Hmm.
go it alone. It's too disorienting. you'll lose your job like I did, and you might wreck your bicycle, or it's just
Right.
like it's not a safe platform for a solo flyer on their first trip.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you, MG.
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about this famous time when you, for the first time, connected with the Merry Pranksters, with Ken
That
Kesey. You met Neil Cassidy, I believe, in 1964, and he brought you over to the farm where you saw the further bus. Tell us about that time.
well, this was a couple of months after my getting fired.
Mm.
Maybe 4 months after that, and it was September. I remember it was September, and it was starting to cool off in Palo Alto. And I was sitting around at the coffee shop, and these two guys came in. It was the middle, it was like 11 o'clock at night. There was nobody else in the place, and we started to talk. And I was interested in them, and they said, "Oh, well, we're going to," and this was after some driving around and smoking a doobie, but we're going to go down to Ken Kesey's house. And I said, "Ooh, that sounds interesting," because he was notorious in
Right.
in already in Palo Alto in those days. So I jumped into their car with them, and off we went down to Kesey's house, it, and so and then I met the Kesey clan, which was little kids and dachshunds, and they had a beautiful little house in the redwood forest. And oh, it was such a nice setting along the creek, and it was just lovely. Um uh and I had already told Neil about my adventure with the ibogaine, and 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 of course he was always somebody who knew better than anybody about everything. And he said he'd heard about it before, but he was never going to touch it. So I got to meet the Kesey clan, and the thing is that in their yard was this bus, and the bus was huge and vividly painted up. I mean, just amazingly, completely covered with interesting little patterns and designs and color, and great use of paint, I would say. And this they had just come home that the night before from the famous bus trip. And the Keseys were so nice. They took me right in and fed me breakfast. And I have petted their dogs. And within 6 weeks, I was living in their treehouse, and that was just wonderful, because by that time I had actually been fired, and I did need a new place to live that didn't cost me anything. So I became one of the clan there, and it was just such a wonderful, um, charming, interesting group of people that they had collected. Unique in many ways.
The
Um,
Merry Pranksters,
the
right?
Merry Pranksters were looked fairly ordinary, but actually they had each of them had a little drive of humor and inventiveness. So the inventiveness and the humor work really well together in a social construct. And so I got to meet the Merry Pranksters, and found them utterly charming, and they just took me right in. So I
And
was
what was like the goal of the Merry Pranksters? I mean, was there sort of a
it
mission besides merrymaking?
there was a mission, and I think the mission developed after the merrymaking trip. Their first trip that they had just come back from across the country was a lark. It was a fun trip. It wasn't. I mean, Ken had encountered LSD at Stanford, and had gotten some somehow. I'm not sure. I think even in those days, and back in 1963, there was still some chemist somewhere was making some, so had made it into the underground market already.
And it wasn't illegal yet.
No, it wasn't, and it was really interesting. We were doing small doses, estimated to be 100 micrograms, but I'm not really sure if it was really that strong. It was mild by my later comparison, but once I had taken that first little dose and sat on the ground connecting to the earth, with your hands down in the dirt and connecting with the soul of the earth. I mean, it was terribly wonderful. So, but then I started to notice the mild hallucinations I was having, where all the pine needles were constantly rearranging themselves in front of me in little
Wow.
patterns, little twirly patterns on the ground. They were not moving, but they were definitely stimulating my pattern recognition in my eyes. So I was laughing about that, and just it was very entertaining. And I was talking to the squirrels and to the pine cones, and generally feeling extremely connected to the planet Earth and nature.
Mm, yeah.
And it was, I felt safe, sitting on the ground, with my hands touching the earth. I was connected. And I think that kept me out of the danger zones of being a first time uh, psychedelic traveler. I
Mm,
felt like I knew my place,
you were
and that I
grounded.
and that I had connected with the right people.
Yeah.
And that case, that was true. So I was very happy about the whole thing. And I soon moved down there with them, and had a little treehouse.
So that time, I'm sure you didn't realize it at the time when you were living it, but it has become this like cultural, icon
Yeah,
time
yeah,
that's become so well known, and all of the people that were your friends and your adopted family during that time became like these cultural icons, yourself included. What I find interesting though is seems like, the story of that time has largely been told by men. Ken Kesey wrote his famous book, One
yeah,
Flew
yeah.
Over the
That's in
Cuckoo's
the
Nest.
past.
There's the electric Kool-Aid acid test.
Yeah.
But, you have an incredible story to tell. I heard there's a memoir somewhere. I hope we're going to get to read it someday. Um, but what can you tell us, from your perspective? You guys were doing these acid tests. What was that all about? You were
Well,
really wanting to have people experience LSD.
this was Ken Kesey's idea, and he had worked at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and had seen probably more than he was supposed to see, but and had researched it too, and we met, and he had found someone who would make it, and so they did. And he also realized that the Saturday night party seemed to be this is he he realized he could get people to come to his place, which was a safe place, and take a little LSD and experience, that special a moment when you
Hmm.
get LSD for the first time, which is pretty special, and it's it can rearrange your life. It really can.
Yeah.
So it rearranges your priorities in any case.
Mm.
But so we had a lot of first timers coming through, and it seemed like the project was to turn people on who deserved it, people who were, safe candidates. He was very good at saying you, but not you,
Mm.
and having already experienced some folks who really could not handle it well,
Yeah.
or would and this was where the LSD went into the Kool-Aid at this point. That seemed like the best mixer for it. But there's not always, but every once in a while there'll be one person who doesn't handle it well, who decides, well, if a little is this messy, why don't I take a bunch more?
Ooh.
And there needs to be a guardian by the cauldron. There really does. So we
Guard the
had a few
Kool-Aid.
of those. We had a few of those incidents where you really actually had to sit with somebody practically in your lap and coax them out of their either depression or their their anxiety. It's really anxiety, I think, is what happens
Mm.
when people come to LSD without any training or forethought. They can
Hmm.
they can fall into a state of anxiety, and that's just no fun. And so
Yeah.
the whole idea is to jolly them out of it. So Ken finally developed a bunch of he had some cartoons on videotape, and we worked at trying to make it more humorous and lifting, then being a deep dive. We wanted to make it an opening, and that was the sort of the discovery of the fact that we could do an event and turn people on, in groups, not just one at a time. And
And so
so
these events started bringing in music, right?
yeah, so we obviously needed some musical entertainment, and I guess the only band in Palo Alto at that time that was actually playing and would come to your place and play was the, I don't even think they were the Grateful Dead yet. That came later. But they came down to Ken's and set up and played in the living room, and they fit right in. They sampled the LSD and were good with that. So we knew that they could operate in a complex situation. So all of these pieces started coming together. But really the mastermind was Ken Kesey here, because he was the one that came up with the name and the concept of doing the acid test. So we actually did all, there's a group of us that pulled this together, and I was the tech. So I plugged things in and unplugged things and made sure everything was working, the projectors, the film, the sound system, and all that stuff. And that left Ken free to entertain, which is basically what he did, and talk to people and bring the thing together. And they would hire the band, which turned into the Grateful Dead. And it was a really, I would say, we gave away quite a bit of LSD, but it was very dilute. So you had to drink quite a bit of Kool-Aid in order to get off the ground. So the impulse was not to take people too far on that first journey, but just a gentle introduction that would be entertaining and colorful, with nice lights. We had a whole lighting system to do silly things with, and clips of movies and so on. And that worked really well. And so we did a number of these around California, and did a couple in Oregon. And people seem to always come back around and say, gosh, that was great. Where'd you get that stuff? And we'd have to say, well, you're just going to have to find a source somewhere, because we're out. And
Mhm.
well, we used up our entire little stash doing that. But right about that same time that we had to stop because of law enforcement, who
Mm.
had definitely picked us out of the lineup and said, "Oh, those ones, we've got to get them." So um, we got in the bus, and which was a 1947 school bus that was all painted up, and we drove well, first we took it to San Francisco and did the San Francisco acid test. And then we did a Palo Alto acid test. And then we did a San Jose acid test. And then we kept going and did a Los Angeles acid test after that. And then, because things were heating up in our rear view mirror, we decided it was really be a good thing to go down to San Diego and do a acid test. And we did that at San Diego on the beach, and then we just zipped over the border and went to Mexico for 6 months, and let the curtain close, behind us.
Mm.
And that was, I think, a very wise thing to do.
You weren't actually doing anything illegal at that time, right? But shortly
Hard to
thereafter,
know.
they changed the law.
Yeah.
I mean, with the LSD. I
No, I don't
guess
think it was. It wasn't
maybe
illegal.
marijuana was illegal, but
Yeah, but
technically the
LSD was
LSD
not.
wasn't.
No, but I can see why the law enforcement would be concerned. Because obviously people are coming out onto the street in a different condition than when they went in.
Mhm.
And there was, we always made the LSD in a big garbage can, and lots of little packages of Kool-Aid, and plenty of water and sugar. And at the end of the event, the one of the things we had to do was pour the excess down the storm drains. And so that
Uh-huh.
was always like a big moment with this garbage can, with 5 or 6 gallons of electric fluid going down going down the drain. And often the police would be standing there looking at us, trying to figure out. By this time, it would be morning. The
Right.
acid test went all night and nobody was sleeping. And so they'd be out there watching us as we poured this down the storm drain. And we were very happy too when the bucket was empty. It's like, oh, we got away with it again.
Made it
So
through another night.
it was nerve-wracking in a way, but it seemed really important at the time that we make it accessible to people. And even though the acid tests were small, I mean, the biggest one was like 100 and so people, but it seemed somehow important that certain people join this understanding and this knowledge. Um, I felt very empowered by LSD. I was already a smart kid. I was a National Merit Scholar, et cetera, et cetera. But it enhanced my ability to absorb new information. And I really like new information. So I had to learn several skills quite quickly, and I had to learn how to read people who were tripping and to see if they were in need or in danger or uncomfortable in any way. And that, all of those sensitivities arrived with the drug. And I think that particular set of improvements about being able to read humans
Mm.
more, both delicately and accurately, it's a big plus.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like a lot of incredible awareness and growth came out of those
Yeah,
experiences for everyone who had a chance to
yeah,
participate. And I mean, especially it kind of rolled over into the Grateful Dead and part of the Grateful Dead experience and culture. I'm guessing you met Jerry during that time. What can you
yes,
tell us about, those years of being with Jerry and the Grateful Dead? At that time, I guess
yeah.
LSD was illegal, but was still a big part of the culture. What
It
was that
had
time like?
it, yeah. It was really wonderful. When I left the pranksters and moved in with Jerry, which was they had this nice house on Haight Street in San Francisco. And gosh, I hadn't been in a house for a while. I'd been living in my sleeping bag out in the woods. So it was pretty special. And he and I we had hit it off. And it took me a while to realize that had happened. And it was probably about 6 months after the last acid test that he and I hooked up, and he asked me to come live there. And they had a nice house. I mean, a house, woo, big old Victorian house with three
It wasn't
floors.
a bus.
Yeah, oh, it's so exciting. I didn't have to sleep in my sleeping bag anymore. And he was a wonderful musician, just fantastic and so bright. He was just a bright light. And I felt honored to even be asked to participate in his life as a female partner. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
we
you didn't
went
just
on and
participate, you
had
married
a
him.
couple of kids, and
You guys raised three children, three
yeah,
daughters, right?
3 girls, and they're all perfectly capable, wonderful people. And it's interesting to look back and think about all the warning signs people were delivering to me about this, and none of that stuff happened. I think um, part of it was having forethought. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, being able to see down the road a little bit in front of you is a good skill to work on. See where it might be taking you. I think if I had done that earlier, I never would have done the stuff I did. So
Yeah.
it was something that to develop was
Yeah.
that kind of vision. But it always seemed to me like the road that LSD took us on was a very important road for all the human species. We
Hmm.
need to be able to access this. We have this huge brain and we don't use but a little piece of it most of the time.
So
Whereas
true.
the psychedelics help you really to use more parts of your brain than you thought you had.
Hmm.
And,
Yes.
and I'm
So,
wondering how
so
that
true.
works for you, Kaya.
Yeah, I've found the same. Every psychedelic experience that I've had, whether it was LSD guided by Rick Doblin or
Mhm.
my ibogaine experience, which was very profound and not by
Oh,
myself in a basement, ayahuasca,
mhm.
MDMA, all of them, they've all been very profound. I feel like they have opened up new insights, new possibilities for me. And I want everyone to have access to those insights and possibilities in a safe way.
Yes.
So, I think it's just such a fascinating time now with laws starting to shift. And I'd love to hear your perspective. I believe, you were recently at Psychedelic Science.
Mhm.
So you've seen this like whole evolution of, a time when LSD was just being discovered and
Yeah.
not illegal to it being illegal and considered dangerous. And now we're like finally able to start speaking publicly and studying, and the research
Right.
is coming out about how incredible these compounds can be for healing. So what's your perspective on what's happening now?
My perspective on healing is mixed because what are we healing? What is it? Are we healing? We have to look at that closely. Some
Mhm,
people should not tinker with psychedelics,
mhm.
definitely. And you already know about that. It's just there, people who are a little unstable in their
Yeah.
minds and uncertain in their life direction should really be cautious. And it's not going to help you. It can also make life more difficult.
Hmm.
um, I
Yeah.
we've seen it happen to people. um, I think to be a stable adult is helpful. I was not a stable adult. I was a reckless 17-year-old when I got into this, but it suited me. It suited me, and I think that there are people that psychedelics don't suit, and so if you have a rough experience, step back. Step
Hmm.
back. Just take it easy. It's not a chariot to heaven. It takes you inside your own head, and
Hmm.
it has its limits as
Yeah.
far as what it can teach you. So don't depend on it
Yeah.
for everything, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, very wise words.
Yeah,
Going inside your head is can be a pretty scary place.
it
It's not
can be.
always
Well,
a
yeah, there's
beautiful
more in there.
experience.
Yes, it's a big experience, and we don't want to change ourselves so much that our family and our friends are afraid of us, or have you know are taken aback by the big shift in behavior, which
Hmm.
sometimes comes along with psychedelics.
Right.
So I think learning how to um, dampen the effects when you're out in public or out with people, just be your normal civil self, and
Yeah.
and don't display your wings that you grew when you were high. you know Try to keep your feet on the ground. I think that's how it's said. um we were very, very fortunate in having a one person that connected with us, and that was Bill Graham,
Oh
who
yeah.
he was a refugee from coming out of dangerous situations in Europe. He came to the United States, grew up, had a lot of ambition, and he got into putting on events. He was the dance hall king, and he's a great example. And I remember when Bill Graham finally got dosed. Oh, he was so angry. He was
Really?
absolutely furious. But a few days later, he apologized and said, actually, wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty good. And it was just that he had stuff he had to do, and he didn't
Oh,
like. We don't know who dosed him, but somebody did. And
oh, okay.
uh, and it's just, that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to like shock people out of their work program or their timeline or their family reunion or any of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
I think that psychedelics are something that you got to manage carefully about how and when and where and with who,
Hmm.
because all those things matter a great deal. And for me, being in nature is really important. It's not really good to find yourself high and at the bus stop at midnight, waiting for a bus that never comes. So you really want to pay attention to your plan and try to stick to your plan as much as you can, because it is a journey outside of your normal life. And I mean, I really appreciate psychedelics for the joy and energy that I get from them, and the ideas, and all of that, the streaming of the contents of your other mind, wherever that's located. So
Mm,
there are all these good things there, but it's also a step. It's a step away from your regular life, and you've
yeah.
got to figure out how to step back
Yeah. Yeah. Do it with care.
with care. Yeah,
Yeah.
with a plan.
Wow. Be beautiful wisdom. And I'm sure all of our listeners really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your stories. If people want to hear more about your stories, and I'm personally, and I know a lot of other people are waiting for that memoir, how can
Oh,
we
good.
learn more about
Oh,
you?
eventually, it's eventually going to happen. Oh my God, it's it's really a task to write a book. So I don't task myself enough, but I also I feel strongly that yes, the story does need to get told and handed out. Other people's memoir. I read other people's memoirs right now to just to see how they're constructed and what people think is important. About telling your personal story. And what I noticed about some really good memoirs is that they're fun to read. So that's the trick now, is to come up with stuff that's fun to read.
I'm sure you will have no problem with
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
You
yeah,
have a lot of incredible stories to tell that will
yeah.
be very, very fun to read. It's very fun to listen to you.
Okay, are
So,
you writing a book?
oh man, I have started. This is like I understand why you
Yeah,
haven't finished it yet, because I've also started probably 5 books since my last book
got
came
it.
out, and I haven't finished any of them.
That's
It really takes a
five
lot of
different topics. Woo,
five different
that's
books.
a
Yes.
big layout for you to navigate.
I
You
know.
have
I
to
need to pick one and finish it, but
pick one.
I did finish a children's book, which I love, that's about mirror neurons. But,
About what?
mirror neurons, they're a special cell in the brain. It's how we imitate one another and experience empathy.
Oh my
Favorite
goodness,
topic
I
of
don't
mine.
know. I'm writing this down. Wait, ear neurons. Wait a second.
Mirror neurons, like mirror, it's called Mirror on the Brain. It's a children's book.
Mirror. Okay,
So,
check it out.
all right,
I love
MG,
to
I
look
want
things
to
up.
thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me
Yeah,
today, to just give us a little taste of what that time was like, and share your wisdom for, all of us who are now coming to some of these experiences for the first time.
yeah.
And is there any, final words you'd like to leave us with?
It's always an adventure. And be
Yeah.
ready for the adventure. Have your water bottle, have a few bucks in your pocket. Remember where you put your car keys. All of these things matter a
Yes.
lot. And
Uh,
I think everybody has fun in different ways, but remember to have fun. And that was
mm.
the prankster motto. Fun is really important. And we have these hands, we can do all sorts of fun things with them.